at the very end of the reading, we hear this mention that in the end, right, God will judge all the sort of secrets of people's hearts, right? And this is a really important thing, I think, to think about. Perhaps it's more clear to me simply because I hear people's confessions all the time, but people have a lot of secrets. A lot. And they're not all like, I don't know, they're not all scandalous, but there is a lot that we hide from other people, a lot that we hide from ourselves. There's a lot of hiding that we do from the truth, right? From ourselves, from who we want to be and who we think we should be, or things we've done in our past, right? Oh man, there's lots of secrets about our past, right? Because we're in a constant state of sort of discord and fragmentation with ourselves just across time, right? Like so much of our struggle with keeping secrets and people not knowing things is very much about us not being able to figure out and decide who we are, right? And not being able to be in charge, right, of all of our own decisions. And so there's a sense in which we keep secrets because we're out of control, right? And we lack the wisdom. And so we get this mention at the end of this reminder that we don't, and this is partly great deal reason why we're told not to judge people, but it also gives us some insight today into what it means to be a saint, since today is All Saints of North America. And we'll talk briefly about Saint Olga, who was a brand new Alaskan Native American saint, was just canonized a saint like 3 days ago. What's important to remember about these secrets is that we don't really know, right, the whole story of the people that we're in relationships with. And you know what? Good thing, right? Good thing. Because this, yes, keeping a secret can be bad, but this reality that we live with, which is that people don't always know the true us. We don't know the true us, that we hide things, that people don't see the full picture of who they're interacting with, and we don't always see the full picture of ourselves, that is a grace and a mercy, right? Precisely because we're immature and we can't handle it, right? If there is just full disclosure, right? Okay, you know what full disclosure would be? If in this moment, everyone saw everything with complete transparency in themselves and everyone else, do you know what the definition of that is? Hell. That's what that is. And I mean this not jokingly, I mean this very precisely, that is exactly what hell and the judgment is, right? When it talks about God judging other people, coming to judge, that the judgment is simply just putting it all out in the light. And we all know how terrifying the thought of that is. Like right now, if in front of everybody else, but not anybody else, just you, if you were in the middle and everything about you became completely known, you tell me if that would be the worst experience of your life. Right? It would. So there's a lesson here in discretion as we move through and relate to other people, right? Of knowing when to keep that sort of shadow of mystery on somebody else, and especially knowing that when someone maybe is going to be too exposed, that we do something to cover and guard that person. A great example from the scriptures is the sons of Noah, right? Is you have Ham who comes in and finds his father drunk and naked, right? Maybe some of us have had harder periods of life of partying than others, and maybe we have experiences or memories of friends or people we know who, at the end of their fun, right, end up in a very embarrassing situation or place, right? Like we've all had that happen, well, to someone near us. And so what they did with their father is they walked backwards, right, and like put like a blanket on him. So, right, and this is sort of like covering your father's sins. This is where like this phrase sort of comes from. But there is a time and place, and this requires a great amount of wisdom and discretion of knowing when to sort of maybe call somebody out, or maybe to sort of let somebody have the consequences of their actions, right? And then when to sort of come in and maybe cover up something for somebody, to give them some cover, because it's just too much to handle and bear, right? So we're given the amount of disclosure, right, of ourselves, of who God is, and of other people to the measure of our own spiritual maturity, right? And so the hiddenness of God, right, is a grace. And let me explain exactly why this is. Because self-discovery and coming to know the divine are the same thing, right? You come to know and understand yourself only when you come to God, right? And the same is true is that when you come to God, it's inevitable. It's part of the process that you will have to come to know and understand yourself better, right? So the revelation of God in your own life, right, goes hand in hand with self-revelation in some way, right? And so for God to reveal more of yourself to you or more of himself, the question is like whether or not you're ready to handle all of you yet, right? And so this idea of not judging other people, and this brings us back to this idea of what a saint is. And that this idea that given all that we don't know and can't know, and to some degree, thank God that we don't know about everyone, right? What does that say about how we understand what a saint is or what holiness is? And part of that means is that we don't know, just as we don't know the secret sins of others, we also don't know the full extent of everyone else's virtue and kindness and sacrifice either. We just don't know. And so given all this, given our own brokenness, given how much we can't handle, right, of knowing about ourselves and God, that maybe we should be a little bit kinder and more patient and more forgiving, right? And when we haven't been, maybe go back and make amends and try to make that right in some way, right? Is that we don't know, right? Like sometimes we might see somebody and what's visible to us, right, might just be all their bad qualities, right, that we happen to see. And so this just gives us pause, right, in terms of judging other people, whether we judge them to be holy and righteous people or whether we judge them to be sinners. And the reality is that just as sin hides, right, and can be hard to locate and find, the same is true with real goodness and holiness in someone else's life. That it can be found in very ordinary, plain places. One of those very ordinary and plain places that we find it is in the native woman from Alaska, who was a priest's wife, whose baptismal name was Olga. She was just, well, like pretty much all the Native Americans, a poor woman from a little village right out in the bush who was the wife of a priest, and during her life was a midwife and helped women in pregnancies, especially women who had unwanted pregnancies or out of wedlock, right? She did a lot of work with women like this. And that's what she did, right? But then, and she had a reputation for a lot of holiness in her own life. But the extent of that holiness was not clear, right? It's one thing to be like, oh, I'm interacting with a very good, like, holy, righteous person. This is, who's a great role model or something. But then you don't realize how deep that holiness was. And for her, the holiness shows up more later after she's dead. She died in, I think, 1970 or 71, something like that. And so in the following, I guess, 50 years after she's been dead, she has appeared to dozens and dozens of women, right, in visions and dreams, who had unwanted pregnancies, who were alone and struggling and considering abortion, right? And she appears to them all the time, right? So there's this whole like ministry of this, and there's all these women who have these stories, right, of her appearing. And you're like, well, what is that, right? It's like you might have, met her and thought, oh, she's a very holy person, but didn't think she was like, quote, like a saint, right? Like someone who appears in visions to people or something like this. And so one thing to keep in mind, and this is why there's a great book called Everyday Saints, and it's a very fun, enjoyable book, but it's also a really great lesson that like holiness and goodness is everywhere, and it's hidden. And I think this is I know this has helped me tremendously in my own life, is is really taking to heart that passage from Paul where he says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you'll remember it most likely, is whatever is good, whatever is lovely, whatever is like pure and noble, right? Dwell on those things, right? But here's the trick though, is that those things don't just always present themselves to you, right? The good, the beautiful, the lovely, you often have to dig for and find, and most importantly, you have to be looking for it, right? And you can see that, right? That there are hidden beauties and hidden virtues in everyone around you, right? That maybe even that person, because they're so close to that, because that's just who they are, they don't maybe even realize the extent of their own virtue in a certain area or way. But you do. You may be able to see it with greater clarity, which is also why we need each other, because the only way to know ourselves is to see ourselves through the lives of other people. So if we go around looking for this, right, with the right kind of eyes, right, we very well might be able to see the Spirit of God, right? We might very well be able to identify that sanctity in another life, right? I had the privilege of knowing and receiving, spiritual guidance from Father Roman, who is another one of these people. He's passed away. It's been well over a decade now. And I knew him. He was a confessor. He was someone who suffered in the gulags in Romania. Really unimaginable amounts of torture. And I got to know him for a while. I grew up near a monastery. And so I was able to get to know him. And, you meet him and you interact with him, and he's a wonderfully sweet person. But you don't, unless you do some reading or talking to other people, you don't know his whole story and what he's been through, and how it could be possible that someone who has received so much hate and ugliness in their life could be such a beautiful person with so much love, right? Like that in itself is a far bigger miracle than appearing to people in visions, right? And this is what I mean, right? The whole holiness is not just in the spectacular. Most of it resides in the ordinary, right? And the benign of our lives. And so I had the privilege to interact with him. And here's the thing is that, like, being a saint, when you actually interact in the life of someone who's that holy, you realize that it makes them more human, not less, more relatable, right? More accessible, not less. And so when you think about someone like Olga living her life like that, we all have this question, right, that haunts us, which is like, am I living my life right and well, right? When I sit at the bedside of people who are dying, right, and there's some sort of heart-to-heart conversation that occurs, the things that people always ask are this, right? The concerns, the anxieties they have are like, was I a good husband? Was I a good father? Was I a good person? Like, that's all that people care about. And trust me, that's all you really care about either, even though you're distracted about these things. And what we have before us is the burden of fully becoming who it is that God has in store for us to be, which is nothing less than a saint. And that is both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. To know how much you and I are capable of, right? And again, back to all the secrets, knowing how much more we have yet to grow, to be able to share ourselves with other people and to know and to be known, right? But that's exactly why we're all here right now, right? Is to come to this table so that we can open ourselves up a little bit more, right? Love each other a little bit better, right? And so maybe those dark places, the places where things hide, retreat just a little bit. Glory to Jesus Christ.